General Hospital will reveal Valentin had once been a fugitive, living in the shadows after being accused of treason and entanglement in the murky dealings of the WSB. Though he managed to stay one step ahead of the law, his existence was marked by paranoia, isolation, and the constant threat of betrayal. He moved through cities under false names, slept in obscure hotel rooms, and trusted no one. The lavish life he once knew had crumbled, leaving him with only fleeting memories of Port Charles, and the ache of separation from the one person who tethered him to that world, Charlotte. Despite the danger surrounding him and the emotional cost of survival, Valentin's heart never strayed from his daughter. Charlotte remained his last anchor to a life that once held meaning. Even as he buried himself deeper in secrecy, every decision he made was haunted by the thought of her, her safety, her future, and the way her absence had hollowed him out. She was not just a daughter to him, she was redemption personified, a second chance he believed he might never earn but refused to stop hoping for. So when Valentin learned that Charlotte had returned to Port Charles, his instincts overpowered his caution. He could no longer remain hidden. Against all reason, he returned to the very place he had once fled, not just to see his daughter again, but to confront the shadows that had driven them apart. His return was more than a personal risk, it was the opening move in a long-planned strategy to expose the man who had destroyed his life, Jack, the current director of the WSB and a figure who once stood beside Valentin as a trusted ally. Jack was no ordinary enemy. He was intelligent, calculated, and ruthless, a man with the resources to manipulate outcomes before they unfolded. Years ago, he had leveraged Valentin's own secrets, twisted his past into a weapon, and framed him as the scapegoat for crimes rooted in Jack's ambition. The betrayal was personal, venomous, and thorough. To everyone else, Valentin had become the villain, the rogue agent gone dark. But the truth was far more sinister, and only Valentin knew it. Determined to reclaim his name and his life, Valentin set a plan into motion. He began piecing together the paper trail Jack had tried so hard to erase. Old contacts were discreetly approached, digital footprints were traced, and a silent war began in the undercurrents of Port Charles. Every move Valentin made was calculated to draw Jack out, to force him to reveal the truth hidden behind his respectable facade. But the plan, though precise, could not account for Jack's unpredictability. Instead of cornering his enemy, Valentin walked into a trap. Jack, always one step ahead, struck first. Valentin was arrested before he could present his evidence, charged once again with crimes he hadn't committed. His return to Port Charles, intended to be an act of justice, became the beginning of a new imprisonment. The media labeled him guilty. Friends grew silent. The walls closed in. But even behind bars, Valentin hadn't lost. Because from the shadows, someone was still fighting for him, someone who had never stopped believing in his innocence, Anna. And she was just getting started. However, Valentin's intricate plan did not unfold the way he had envisioned. What was meant to be a calculated takedown of a powerful adversary quickly unraveled into a devastating reversal. Rather than exposing Jack as the true architect of corruption within the WSB, Valentin found himself ensnared in the very trap he believed he had laid. Jack, cunning and always one step ahead, anticipated the threat and struck with ruthless precision, turning the tables before Valentin had the chance to act. In a matter of hours, Valentin went from predator to prey. Armed agents descended on him in Port Charles, a place that had once been both home and battleground. This time, however, the town was not a refuge, it had become his prison. Valentin was arrested, handcuffed in plain sight, and paraded through the streets of the very city where he had once wielded influence, feared by many and respected by few. Now, whispers turned into murmurs of vindication. To the public, justice was finally being served. Inside the cold confines of a holding cell, Valentin faced a grim irony. Port Charles, once the setting for some of his darkest deeds and briefest moments of peace, now symbolized a cruel twist of fate. The ghosts of his past, the alliances, the betrayals, the sins he never quite outran, seemed to echo in the walls around him. Many believed the law had finally caught up with the elusive Cassadine. To them, it was only right that the man who had so often danced in the gray shadows of morality should now face a reckoning he could not escape. Whispers spread quickly. Former enemies nodded with smug satisfaction. Even former allies kept their distance, uncertain whether Valentin was a victim or the villain he had always been accused of being. The narrative was clear: the hunter had become the hunted. And for a man who had built his life on secrets, survival, and control, the fall from power was brutal. To the world watching from the outside, this was the end of Valentin Cassadine. But in truth, it was only the beginning of a much deeper game, one that would soon reveal not only his innocence, but the darkness hiding behind Jack's polished mask. And in that quiet moment of defeat, behind locked doors and cold steel, Valentin knew one thing for certain: he wasn't alone. While the eyes of Port Charles turned toward Valentin with suspicion and condemnation, Anna moved quietly, deliberately, beneath the surface of the chaos. Where others saw guilt, she saw something more: a fracture in the narrative, a hidden truth obscured by smoke and mirrors. Anna had known Valentin longer than most. She had seen the man behind the misdeeds, the pain behind the arrogance, and the loyalty buried beneath layers of calculated mistrust. She had witnessed his darkness, yes, but also the humanity he so often tried to conceal. And because of that, she refused to believe that he was the mastermind behind the crimes now pinned against him. This wasn't about love, though love had long been entangled in the complicated fabric of their connection. It was about justice. Anna was a woman guided by principle, by truth, and above all, by a relentless pursuit of what was right, even when the world turned against it. She had watched as Valentin was arrested, vilified, and left to rot in a cell while the true enemy moved freely through the corridors of power. And she knew, deep in her bones, that something was wrong. From the moment the cuffs were locked around Valentin's wrists, Anna began her own silent war. She didn't make public declarations or stage dramatic confrontations. Instead, she worked in the shadows, where she was most dangerous. She reopened case files that had been sealed. She traced financial transactions hidden under layers of false identities. She contacted trusted operatives, dug into encrypted WSB communications, and followed a paper trail that Brennan had tried to bury. Her instincts had always told her that Jack Brennan, the seemingly polished, untouchable director of the WSB, was not what he appeared to be. There had been small inconsistencies, subtle cracks in his stories, and a pattern of manipulations that, when viewed alone, meant little, but together painted a portrait of a man far more corrupt than anyone realized. He had enemies silenced. He had evidence destroyed. And he had used Valentin as a pawn to protect himself, framing him for actions that Brennan had orchestrated from the very beginning. Anna knew she couldn't confront Brennan head-on, not yet. The WSB was a fortress, and he was its gatekeeper. But she also knew that every fortress had its weakness. So she laid a trap of her own. Piece by piece, she constructed a scenario that would bait Brennan into revealing his hand. She leaked false information, planted misleading intel, and carefully created a situation in which Brennan would believe he needed to act swiftly, and recklessly. As she moved forward, Anna kept her cards close, sharing her suspicions with only a select few. She couldn't afford betrayal. The stakes were too high, and Brennan was too powerful. But her determination never wavered. Every late night in front of classified files, every whispered conversation, every coded message, it was all for one purpose: to expose the truth and to free the man who had already paid far too much for sins that weren't his. Anna Devane was no stranger to dangerous games. She had played many in her lifetime. But this time, the stakes were personal. And she was willing to risk everything, her career, her reputation, even her life, to bring the real villain to justice. Anna, drawing upon her years of experience as a seasoned intelligence agent, orchestrated a trap with surgical precision, a trap designed not only to expose Jack Brennan's lies, but to make him walk straight into his own downfall without ever realizing he was being watched. She knew that a man like Brennan, who had risen to power through manipulation, coercion, and deceit, would only be vulnerable when he believed himself to be invincible. So she gave him exactly that illusion. Working in the shadows, Anna constructed a multi-layered web of deception. She fabricated a series of leaks, coded messages that appeared to be from whistleblowers within the WSB, suggesting there were new investigations opening against Valentin. She ensured those whispers reached Brennan's ears. Simultaneously, she carefully planted falsified reports into the WSB's internal system. Reports that seemed to validate Brennan's version of events, coaxing him into a sense of security. All the while, she was monitoring his every move through a network of loyal contacts and covert surveillance. The plan was dangerous, and it required patience. Anna couldn't afford a single mistake. She had to let Brennan believe he was still in control, that he had once again silenced the only man who could expose him. And Brennan, arrogant and overconfident, fell right into the trap. He began to take bolder steps, meeting with compromised agents in secret, giving orders that violated WSB protocol, and, most crucially, referencing fabricated evidence that Anna had planted, believing it to be real. Bit by bit, Anna gathered the truth. Hidden audio recordings, intercepted communications, and encrypted financial trails painted a damning portrait of Brennan's crimes. He had forged critical intelligence documents. He had rerouted WSB operations to cover his own illicit dealings. Most chillingly, he had manipulated the agency's leadership into turning Valentin into a scapegoat, using him to conceal far more treasonous acts, including unauthorized weapons transfers and classified data leaks to foreign operatives. Brennan had not only betrayed Valentin, he had betrayed the very organization he claimed to protect. Throughout this delicate operation, Anna was not alone. She quietly enlisted the support of Mayor Laura, whose influence and discretion were invaluable. Laura used her political clout to grant Anna limited access to WSB archives through backdoor channels, shielding her from internal red flags while she pursued the truth. She also kept local authorities at bay, ensuring Valentin remained protected in custody while Anna worked to vindicate him. Together, Anna and Laura formed a silent alliance, fueled by a shared belief in justice. As Anna's evidence mounted, so did the pressure on Brennan, though he remained oblivious until it was too late. On the day Anna presented her findings, it was not a dramatic arrest or public spectacle. It was methodical, legal, precise. She delivered her report to the proper authorities, backing every accusation with undeniable proof. Brennan, blindsided by the wave of incriminating evidence, was summoned for questioning and quickly found himself ensnared by the very system he had once manipulated with ease. The mask he had worn for so long cracked, revealing the corrupt, self-serving man beneath. No amount of power could shield him now. Valentin was cleared of all charges shortly after. His name, once smeared with accusations and rumors, was officially exonerated. And though the damage to his reputation could not be undone overnight, the truth had prevailed, thanks to Anna's unwavering resolve, her razor-sharp instincts, and her willingness to stand against a machine that had once been her home. It was more than justice. It was a reckoning. When the full truth finally came to light, the weight that had pressed down on Valentin for so long was lifted. The mountain of evidence meticulously uncovered by Anna was irrefutable, and it shattered the false narrative that had haunted him. The charges that had once condemned him, treason, espionage, and conspiracy, were systematically dismissed. Official statements were issued clearing his name, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Valentin could stand before the world no longer labeled as a criminal, but as a man wrongfully accused and cruelly betrayed. Jack Brennan, once untouchable in his role as director of the WSB, was led out of Port Charles in handcuffs, his fall from grace as swift as it was total. His carefully constructed facade crumbled before the public eye. The man who had manipulated international operations, who had framed Valentin to cover up his own treachery, was now the one answering to the justice system he had long believed himself above. His reputation was destroyed, his power revoked, and his name became synonymous with deceit and disgrace. What he left behind was not just a shattered career, but a cautionary tale, a symbol of what happens when ambition turns into corruption. Valentin's release was met with a mix of relief and quiet disbelief. For those who had once turned away from him, shame lingered in their silence. For those who had believed in his innocence, like Anna and Laura, it was a moment of triumph. But for Valentin himself, freedom was not met with celebration, it was met with reflection. Yes, he had been vindicated. Yes, the law had acknowledged his innocence. But the journey had changed him in ways that no court ruling could ever fully erase. The months, even years, of isolation, of being hunted, of constantly fearing for his life and the safety of those he loved, had left scars. Deep, invisible wounds that the justice system could not heal. The darkness he had been forced to endure, the choices he had made in the name of survival, and the distance he had placed between himself and Charlotte, still weighed heavily on him. Though he was no longer a fugitive, Valentin did not return to Port Charles as the same man who once disappeared into the shadows. He came back stripped of illusion, humbled, haunted, and irrevocably changed. No longer driven by pride or vengeance, he was now a man who had stared into the abyss and survived. His freedom, while hard-won, was not a clean slate. It was a second chance. And second chances came with their own burden, the responsibility to make things right. At the center of his thoughts was Charlotte, the daughter he loved fiercely, the child he had tried to protect by pushing away, and the one person who had unknowingly given him the strength to keep going. Every step he had taken, every risk he had endured, had been for her. But he knew that regaining her trust would take time. It wouldn't be enough to be free. He had to prove he could be present, stable, and worthy of her belief. And then there was Anna. Her loyalty, her unwavering belief in his innocence, and her willingness to risk everything, her career, her safety, her peace, to save him, was something he could never repay. Her actions went beyond duty or friendship. They came from a place of deep, unconditional care. And it was that love, steady, quiet, unshakable, that ultimately saved him, not just from a prison cell, but from himself. Valentin understood now that redemption wasn't something the world could give him. It was something he had to find within, and that journey was only beginning. But for the first time in a long while, he wasn't walking it alone.